Alrighty, everybody. Alrighty. Good to see you all. Glad you all could make it today. In the way of announcements, we are planning on doing our first pancakes and pontification of the semester on Saturday. Sounds like it's going to be at a restaurant this semester, or this week, or this month. So, in a really, really long time ago in the past, we went to the IHOP off of 75, so I think we're going to try to do that again. So, obviously, day of, there'll be an announcement for the 4th about that and exactly where it is. But it's the IHOP on 75 and Plano Parkway. It's pretty close to campus. So yeah, if anyone wants to come and just bring your theological questions, your hard questions, your incredibly nerdy questions, and just have a good time getting food and talking about it. So, and other than that, a reminder that next week is a little bit of a special week where we're having a movie night happening that's going to be going longer than we usually go for that. It was supposed to happen last week, but last week was ice and snow. So it is now happening next week. So, other than that, I think I'll go ahead and leave it over to our speaker, Rick Townsend, for the night.
All right. Dr. Rick Townsend.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is kind of like coming home because I was involved at Reasonable Faith as much as I could be while I was a student here as recently as 4 years ago. So graduated in 2021 with a graduate degree in History of Ideas. And my job tonight is going to be to ask you questions. Your job is going to be to answer them. So good luck. So we're going to look at things like how we perceive beauty and what it means, what that says about us that we even perceive beauty, and what that tells us about God as well. So we're going to think about things like, why are we aware of aesthetics and even the concept of beauty? I mean, why would we, if the standard paradigm of evolutionary thinking is correct, why would creatures have been chosen or selected to have this ability to appreciate beauty? Why would we think that God might care about beauty if there's a creator? And isn't beauty just skin deep? So what can we learn about God from thinking about beauty? And does it actually point to God? I'm going to suggest that it does. And so we're going to talk about that tonight. So I'm going to do something extremely dangerous. You ready? You're all sitting, your seatbelts are fastened. I'm going to stop the PowerPoint. And I'm going to attempt to go live. So what I want you to do now is tell me, what is beauty? So this is the response portion where you get to participate. So what is beauty? What do you think? Any ideas? When you think of beauty, what do you think of?
Aesthetically pleasing.
Okay. So aesthetic is too long. I'll just do pleasing if that's okay. All right.
All right.
What else?
Something that makes me feel like awestruck.
Okay, awesome, perhaps.
Or awesome.
I'm going to be shortening because that way I don't have to type quite so much. Yeah. Next. Any other ideas? Come on, you guys are engineers and college students and graduates.
Aesthetics.
Intricate or symmetrical.
Okay. Public typing is always dangerous. That's wrong, but we'll go with it. Okay. How about attractive? Something that attracts you to look at it or to experience it. Would that work?
For sure.
Okay, so we can come up with lots of descriptors, but why would we even think about those things? That's the real question. So let's see if we can go back to. See, there are your answers right there live on the screen. Okay, so you might have said something like, it generates a positive response. It's good. Sometimes if we think of beauty, we don't ever think of beauty as being bad. It's always a good thing. but is it an extension of our survival instincts? That's an answer I've gotten before. It's emotionally satisfying. So lots of ways we can describe it. How about the way that it's defined in the professional literature? So first of all, we got to have two terms, objective and subjective. Now you guys are probably familiar with those terms, right? So let me just briefly, in case anybody's not familiar, this is an object. It's objective. Its reality comes from what? What does the reality of this object come from?
It's physical nature.
Physical nature. Its metal content, its weight, its shape, all those things. But if something is subjective, it depends on the interpretation of the subject. You are the subjects, okay? So whatever you think about it, that's what makes it real or makes it have value. So if I look at something like this, this is a painting you've probably seen before. Anybody know the name of it? Mona Lisa, good job. Okay, there's a chance for interaction, good job. So the Mona Lisa, is it a great painting or not? What do you think?
Pretty good. It almost seems overrated, to be honest.
There you go. Okay, so overrated. But you have
Pretty good.
made a subjective judgment about that. It's based on the way you interpret it. Someone else might think, it's lousy. Somebody else might think it's gorgeous. It's that
Obviously, a
smile.
lot of people like it. So.
A lot of people like it. But it depends on how you interpret the value of this thing. That makes it subjective. But if you want to know the difference between the two, all you have to do is kind of combine them. And before long, if this happens, you're going to get reality pounded into your head. So objective is based on the object. Subjective is based on how you interpret it, okay? So, but what does it say in the literature? If we look at a dictionary would tell us, it would have a definition of something like this: possessing qualities that give great pleasure or satisfaction to see, hear, think about, etc., delighting the senses. But there's also this other idea, excellence of its kind, a beautiful putt on the seventh hole. Is there anything physically attractive about a putt on the seventh hole? Not really, but it's effective, it's elegant in the way that it worked, if it's a good putt. So we see actions sometimes can be attractive because of the way they work out. So that's wonderful, pleasing, and satisfying. So these are this kind of a thing shows us that things can be attractive because of their function. If we look at the Bible, we're going to see there's going to be a number of different definitions. But in the Old Testament, if we look at that first, there are 33 times that the word beauty is used and 61 times that beautiful is used. So clearly it's a concept that's embedded into the text. The meaning is pleasant, agreeable to the senses, to the sight, fair of daughters of men is example of how it's used. But then there's also this other sense, pleasant to the higher nature, giving pleasure, happiness, prosperity, and so agreeable, pleasing, and well suited. Again, the idea of something being properly functioning and so on. If we look at the New Testament, we'll see that idea again. We see beauty less times, but it's used in a very particular way. So for example, this term, which is hard to pronounce, how do we pronounce that?
Horaios.
Oh, thank you. Okay, that's helpful. Want to hear it again?
Horaios.
Yeah, horaios, or something like that. It's beautiful, pertaining to being beautiful, etc. So the appearance, but then there's this other meaning, kalos, which I don't have to have him pronounce, pertaining to being fitted and at the same time probably good, fitting good. Why are you bothering her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. And we'll see this come up again. Do you remember the context in which Jesus said that to someone? Anybody remember? Go ahead. Somebody was going to say. It was different. It was a different lady, and she was washing Jesus' feet with her hair. Now, does that sound very pretty, washing somebody's dirty feet? No, but it was a beautiful thing that she did in serving him. So it's an action that's appropriate. So again, if we see examples in Scripture, we see this is a depiction of the Garden of Eden. And God said that it was pleasing to the eye and that the fruit was good for food. Okay? We see other examples in Solomon's temple. This is an interesting one. It's symmetrical, it's well designed, it's well proportioned. And the terms that are used in describing it, Solomon garnished the house with precious stones for beauty. It wasn't for any function, it was actually for beauty. Francis Schaeffer has a really cool book. He's passed away, of course, but his book, Art in the Bible, is about an 80 or 90-page book, very short, but it's really well done, and you can download it for free PDF. Students like free books, right? So it's a short read, but it's really good. He says this about that. Notice this carefully. The temple was covered with precious stones for beauty. There was no pragmatic reason for the precious stones. They had no utilitarian purpose. God simply wanted beauty in the temple. God is interested in beauty. So again, we have this idea that God has some interest in the idea of things being attractive or beautiful. When we look at the things that are in creation, look at the animal designs. These don't seem to be strictly for survival benefit. It looks like they're just there to be appreciated. Okay? And again, God said after he created all these animals, he saw that it was good. And these are the things, some of the things he created. And again, another example, we talked about this one. Aware of this, Jesus said, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing." And again, there's nothing physically beautiful about washing dirty feet. But the act of serving and the act of showing her care and concern and love for him was a beautiful thing. So now think about the animal kingdom. I'm going to show you a short video of the bowerbird and its courtship dance. Have you ever heard of the bowerbird? You probably won't forget it after this, but we'll see.
He expands his pupils alternately. It's an oddly mesmerizing display.
A little creepy, perhaps.
He waves his wing like a matador's cape.
And look at all the other birds that God's created in the variety.
Generously, she drops him a hint. It's the bird equivalent of a bouquet of flowers.
Okay, maybe just a little creepy, but why would they go to all that length for what appears to be a mating ritual? And why would God create all of these creatures with these incredible colors and variety? All of that has to be programmed into the genetics. It doesn't come for free. And so we don't fully understand the genome. We understand some things about DNA. That's a whole different lecture we'll give another time. But it's all coded with the animal, and these changes from one type of bird to the other, and just the plumage is not an accident. So we see those things and we think of them as beautiful. At least I do. I'm going to assume that you do, but let me know if you disagree. We can talk about it. But how do we recognize beauty? Well, the first thing is through perception, through the five senses, and through those senses we perceive something, then we interpret it, and then we think about it, we contemplate it. That's a uniquely human attribute as well. So how did we get to that kind of position? Well, I want you to think about the interplay between the senses and how we perceive things. And he's going to give you some instructions right at the beginning. I want you to cooperate. Okay, so follow the instructions.
So I want you to stare at the middle blue. So first you'll notice a gap moving along the arrangement of ducks. But right about now you should be seeing a yellow duck start coming into view. Even though it's not there, your mind's filling in the blanks. And it becomes so vibrant that you can just reach out and grab it. Oh, a duck.
So, and the duck becomes real. Do you guys still do ducks? I brought this. I brought this just for you. So our perceptions can be helpful, but they can also play tricks on us, right? So that's another aspect. So how do we get to where we are now? And this is where my history major comes in, just for a little bit, but we'll speed through it. But we need to know how we got here. And so if we want to know how we got here, we have to know that things have causes, right? So if you see something like this, and you see a target with an arrow in it, what do you assume about that situation? What else is someplace nearby? I'm sorry?
Archer.
An archer. So this guy is around someplace, okay? Because things have causes. So what is it that caused us to have this perception of beauty and this interaction with beauty that we have? So this is the brief history of man from the Middle Ages onward. And we're going to speed through to a point that I want to focus on. But it starts in the Middle Ages, which, by the way, well, a whole separate lecture that's kind of fun is how we didn't ever have a Dark Ages. But back in the about 1100 to 1200 period, they rediscovered the Greek works and assumed that because Aristotle and all those guys were older, that they had a better connection to reality, and so they began integrating those things into Christianity. So some of the ideas we have in Christianity are really kind of plagiarized from Aristotle and other Greek philosophers, and they may not be Christian. So we have to kind of watch out for those. But one of the big thinkers back then was a guy named Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas Aquinas got a lot of things right, a few things wrong, but he really helped us to think some about what Aristotle understood about the physical world. And Aristotle was kind of a theist. He was not an atheist, probably like Socrates was, but we don't understand Socrates because he just asked questions. He didn't tell us what he believed. Okay, but moving on. So we have this idea of the connection between the physical world and beauty that goes back all the way to Aristotle. Fast forward to a key event in 1450. Anybody know the key date, 1450, and what happened then? The invention of the printing press revolutionized mankind. One of the first things that they did when they invented the printing press was they began printing Bibles. And what this did was it brought about some changes in the way people thought about the interplay between God and man, because all of a sudden, instead of everything being in Latin, they were able to read it for themselves. This is a Gutenberg Bible. There are about a half dozen of these in the United States. Library of Congress has one. There's one at Yale. There's a couple in other universities. The Museum of the Bible has some pages from a Gutenberg Bible. Fascinating to see this thing from now going on 600 years ago. But what that did was it allowed the Bible to be first in Latin, but then eventually it became translated into the vernacular languages so that people had access to the ideas of Scripture. And now we have personal responsibility, we have individual autonomy, all those ideas coming into the culture. And how's that going to relate to beauty? Well, hang on. So we have the Renaissance, and typically people will say the Renaissance started before the Reformation. I think the Renaissance really was accelerated by the Reformation. And the ideas of the Bible freed men to think more clearly about the relationship between God, man, and the creation. And one of the key thinkers here was Descartes. I think, therefore I am. But we'll fast forward to the Age of Enlightenment, which is probably the worst named period in history. It's really the Endarkenment. It's where we took away any kind of relevance to the real world and said we're going to throw away all the wisdom that came in the previous centuries and millennia, and we're going to start from scratch. Probably not a good idea for success, because there were probably a few good thinkers back then. And the key guy here questioning everything was David Hume, a radical skeptic who didn't believe anything. He believed everything should be questioned. So fast forward, though, there's one more important thing that came about as Descartes is thinking about, I think, therefore, I can't believe my senses. He knew he could be fooled by rubber ducks, right? But rather than stay fooled by rubber ducks, he said, what I can't deny is that I'm perceiving things. Of course, we point to our minds. Our spirit is really elsewhere. But we think about things the way we perceive them as they come into our heads, right? And so what he couldn't account for was this thing, intellectual problem of consciousness. Where does consciousness come from? And how is that possibly explained by evolutionary design? And that's where we have to get to the key point that I want to make, and that is getting to this guy who, I know you know this guy, okay? And he denied that there was any spiritual nature at all, that everything was materially created. But there's another guy who was involved in the idea of natural selection. Anybody know who this is?
Alfred Russel Wallace.
Alfred Russel Wallace, exactly. And he and Darwin had kind of a falling out over this issue of consciousness. And it was pretty dramatic. So they disagreed. Wallace initially, again, endorsed what Darwin was doing, but the more he thought about it, he realized there were some things that could not be accounted for. And so he wrote this book, 1870, so 1859's Origin of Species. Only 11 years later, he comes out with this book, which is Contributions to the Theory of Natural Selection. A series of essays, he called it. And again, this is 1870, also in London, so they're kind of sparring over there in London. What it said is this. Now, the cool thing about these old books is when you look at the table of contents, the whole outline is there. You don't have to outline it yourself. It's all in the table of contents. So as we look at this table of contents, here's some of the things it says. The brain of the savage shown to be larger than it needs to be. Size of brain, important element of mental power, et cetera, et cetera. He goes on and on. And at the end of this chapter, he's saying things like this. The origin of some of man's mental faculties by the preservation of useful variations not possible. Wait, did he say not possible? He said not possible, right here. He said it's not possible. Difficulty as to the origin of the moral sense, summary of the arguments, etc., of the insufficiency of natural selection to account for the development of man, the origin of consciousness is a problem. How do you get that from atoms? How do you get from atoms to this idea of natural selection not being sufficient to explain how we get consciousness? And so they have this break. So what is consciousness, and how does that play into art? Let me summarize where I think we are so far, and hopefully we're on the same page. First, I would say that beauty is not direct evidence for God, but beauty is something that points toward something outside the physical world that looks like an entity we might call God. And so the question is, how do we recognize what beauty is as we're involved in this contemplation that only humans can do? Okay? So that's where we're going next. So the definitions that we have in use are these. It's that which we are drawn toward or attracted to, and actions which are selfless, altruistic, elegant, and effective. That's kind of the working parameters that we're using for the idea of beauty from here on. Everybody with me so far? Nobody's lost? Whew, okay, I was hoping for that'd be the case. All right, so how do we recognize beauty? What are we drawn toward? Well, at the time that I put this presentation together, there was a professor in the history of ideas area called his name was Frederick Turner. He's now passed away last year. But I used some of his quotes because he is a secular, I think he would have called himself a pan-entheist. He and I had lunch together a couple times, and we never I couldn't quite get him to nail down what he called himself. But he kind of thought that all of nature was one. And pan-entheism is the idea that God is part of his creation. He created it and then indwelled it, but he's not outside of it. He's in creation. But even this atheist, pan-entheist, whatever he was, came up with these ideas. He said, it's quite clear that the infinite number of hypotheses that will coherently explain a given body of observational and experimental evidence, scientists instinctively choose the one which they find the most beautiful or elegant. So the one that works the best. So what works, it describes a beautiful thing. So what appears as most beautiful or elegant is what he would have said was beautiful in this context. He also looked at this beauty in action idea, and he said, beauty is the source of our deepest knowledge of the world. I'm not sure I'd agree with that, but he thought it was a significant way that we understand the world, and the foundation of effective and ethical action. And then he said, beauty in this view is the highest integrative level of understanding and the most comprehensive capacity for effective action. And he goes on, he talks about how the brain is one of these organs that uses a lot of energy. And he says the brain is something for which the body will willingly sacrifice itself. In other words, to make sure the brain stays functional, other parts of your body will shut down to keep your brain functioning. And he sees that as an example of altruistic action. And when you apply that to human action, it's giving of yourself for others. And again, that's so beautiful actions are altruistic, selfless, and effective. So I want to take that idea, again, from an atheist, pan-entheist, with whom I would agree on some of those ideas, and I want to look at two pieces of art. And we're going to look at these pieces of art in terms of beauty, okay? So I want to introduce a guy named Henry Nouwen, who is a Catholic theologian. He spent much of his life working with mentally handicapped. That was kind of his ministry field that he he just devoted his life, decades of his life to. And he was a deeply contemplative man. And at some point he had a poster of this painting, which is Rembrandt's Return of the Lost Prodigal. He had a painting in his office, and it was the father and the son embracing. And so this painting became kind of an obsession to him. He would meditate on it. He'd read the story of the lost prodigal. And he began thinking more and more. And then eventually he discovered that that's not the whole painting. That's only part of it. And as he discovered this painting, he went to see it. And it was in St. Petersburg, Russia, still there, part of St. Catherine, or Catherine the Great's collection. She acquired it somehow in the many interplays with Europe and Russia. But it hangs in this museum called the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. And he sat before this painting for hours, the live painting. It is that big. It's a huge painting. And he meditated on it. And the outflow of that was a book, which is here. Let's see if I can get the book to come back. Well, the book is on the Return of the Prodigal. Well worth your time to download and read. It's, again, a fairly short read. But Rembrandt painted this when he was toward the end of his life. And we're going to look at some details here. But first I want to read the story of the prodigal son. And most of you have heard this before. It's not a very long story, but here's how it goes. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out, go back to my father, and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to the father, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine who was dead is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of his servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. You never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes, this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, and he comes home, you killed the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" So as Nouwen contemplated that parable, and he also looked at Rembrandt's meditation, if you will, through painting, he noted multiple things that really helped him think through the meaning of what Jesus was trying to get across. As you look at the details, we'll start at the bottom with the feet. Maybe we can turn down the lights a little bit because it might be easier for you to see the detail. But the feet of this son are bruised, broken, bloody. The shoes are broken. One's completely off his foot. The other is broken. This guy has been through a heck of a journey. And then as we look toward his head, we see him kind of nestled in his father's stomach area, or chest area. And you can see just a relaxed look. Now, how Rembrandt, just how he got this to work, through art to tell this kind of emotion is amazing. But you can see that the face is just relaxed and just relieved, if you will. The Father's hands have been pointed out by many art critics to show two different characteristics. The one on your right looks like kind of a feminine hand, whereas the one on the left is a more masculine, strong hand showing the strength of a man, but also the sensitivity of a woman. So the Father is encapsulating all the characteristics of good parenting as he accepts his son lovingly back. When you look at the Father, Rembrandt frequently put himself into paintings. And so people believe this is a self-portrait. It was at a time in his life when he was losing his sight. And you can see he's not looking directly at his son. He's kind of gazing off, contemplating, just happy to have his son back. One of the eyes looks almost closed in this father who is going blind. But he also is relaxed, relieved, rejoicing with his son. But you look at the contrast on the other side, and here's the older son. The older son is reserved. He's clasping his hands together. He's not embracing. He's kind of covered up with his robe of the family, showing his royal status within the family, if you will. But he is not. He's standoffish. He's looking at the scene from a distance, not willing to be a part of it, not willing to embrace his brother and celebrate him being home. But Rembrandt doesn't stop there. He also brings in some characters that are not in the story. So here are other people who would be involved. Here is a servant. He's not in the red robe, but he's also pretty well dressed. So he may be the business manager of the estate, the accountant. He looks like an important servant, but not part of the family. And he's looking on, thinking about, what's this going to do to the books? You know, how am I going to account for this? This is a different thing than I've ever seen before. How do I deal with this and help my master financially through it? He may be thinking about some of those things. There's another servant, but there's a woman in the background. Again, there are no women in the parable, but Rembrandt wants to bring the whole family dynamic in. And so this woman appears to be perhaps a family member. She's not a servant. She's got jewelry on. And so you wouldn't think of her as a servant. Perhaps she is the wife of the older brother. She's too young to be the mother or the husband or the wife of the father. And so she's probably a member of the family in a high position, but not a servant. And she's looking on going, well, this is different. And how will this affect her status with this whole changed family dynamic? There's another servant that's shown, and he's more the kind of person who might have been directed to go get the fattened calf. So he's more of a laborer, but he's kind of looking at the audience, and he's right in the middle of the painting. You'll see that in a second when I zoom back out. And he's looking directly at us, going, how would you respond? And what would you do in this situation? So it's kind of a probing look that he has. And then just above him, to his left, your right as you look at it, there's a pillar, and there's a figure that is carved into this pillar. And I've kind of highlighted it here. It is the figure of a man who is playing a lute. And he's seated, and the idea is he's a musician. And this is a house that's filled with joy, that's filled with music, that celebrates things. And so Rembrandt brings that element into the picture as something the father valued and built into his home. And so when you see the whole picture together, you see something very interesting. You see all these characters as you begin contemplating it, but you see that Rembrandt has structured it in an unusual way, because normally the key idea of the painting is right in the middle. And that's where we saw the poster that Nowen had, which was just the father and the son. But seeing all of this, there's a void, a dark area in the middle, which is brilliant. And there's a Christian symbolism that we can show there. So if we bring a Bible story into the focus and how we talk about what Jesus did for us, let's look at how that story is typically told. And I can do that in two verses. This one is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. You've probably heard that before, right? And then Paul says this: the wages of sin, or the wages are what we've earned. It's not just the consequence, it's what we've earned because of sin is death. But the gift of God is eternal life in Jesus Christ our Lord. Frequently this idea is depicted as the idea of a bridge. and a bridge between two cliffs. So if we take the elements of this and put it into the diagram, and we'll get back to Rembrandt in a second, but we have God and whoever. Those are the key actors. So if we put these people on separate cliffs, typically we put man on the left, the whoever, and God on the right. And the idea is that on the left side, we're left to our own devices. This whoever represents every man and woman. And the right side represents God's eternal kingdom. And the ground rules are, it's too far to jump across, you can't climb across, your works can't get you there. There's no physical way to get from one side to the other. And so the result of being on the left side is the wages of sin is death. That's a pretty bleak picture, but that's what we have earned because of our sin. Now on the right side, we have a totally different picture. We have the gift of God being eternal life. Now if you had to choose one of those two sides, which side would you rather be on? Hopefully the right side. If not, we need to have a chat. But if you were to take your own situation and think about which side am I on, which side would you put yourself on? We'll leave that as a rhetorical question, but I want you each to think about that for a second. Would you be on man's side, or would you be united with God? Well, you can't get there on your own. You can't be good enough. And so these verses say that the way that we get from one side to the other is by making a payment, and the payment that we owe is separation from God. But that payment has already been paid through Jesus Christ, through the cross. And so the idea is that Jesus, by his payment of being separated, when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? He experienced separation from God that he didn't earn. And so he experienced that, and he experienced it on our behalf. Since he didn't know it himself, that payment can be extended to anyone who trusts in this situation of Jesus having done that. And so the idea, again, is that whoever believes and places trust in that payment of Christ can be united with God and and have the relationship, much as the prodigal son was reunited with his father. So if we take this picture, typically we draw it that way, but we're going to reverse it for the purposes of the Rembrandt painting. And if we superimpose these cliffs on top of the painting, it looks something like this. We have the unification idea on the left with God and the gift of God being eternal life, God being the one who receives those who are sinners to himself. And on the other side, the wages of sin is death. The separation is shown on the right side. And the void in the middle is that void between the two cliffs. So Rembrandt was depicting this idea, even though he didn't know this illustration. But it's interesting that he depicted that very idea and then, of course, filled in the gaps. Now, these are on the side panels, you can see some of the ways that he was thinking about doing the drawing before, and they always show everybody together in the middle. And then he came up with this idea of showing them separated to accentuate that division that was between the older son and the father and the younger son at this point. So the point here is that every piece of art tells a story, and many pieces of art, not every single one, but many pieces of art, and certainly over the course of an artist's career, his work will generally tell a story that he is communicating to the world. And so in this case, Rembrandt and many of his other paintings are biblical in nature as well, but he's communicating his world view, his view of how things work in the world spiritually through this painting. So everybody with me on that one? Pretty cool painting. Amazing. I want to show you a contrasting view. When I was here at UT Dallas in the History of Ideas program, it's an interdisciplinary degree, and so you have to have some aesthetics courses, literature, and then history of ideas being the focus. And so one of the artists, we each had to choose an artist from a Swiss art collection because there was an art collection that was trying, at the time, Richard Bretel, who you may know the Bretel building that's now on campus, and Richard Bretel passed away a couple of years ago as well. But he was one of my professors when I was here, and so he was working on getting this collection of Swiss art acquired by the university. I don't know how that ever worked out. I've never been able to figure that out. Should probably go over to the Bretel Center and see if they have it on display. I don't know. But the artist that I was studying was one of the artists from this collection who's not very well known in mainstream circles, but his name is Kuno Amiet. So this is Kuno Amiet. He was early 20th century he passed away in 1961 at the age of 93 or something like that. He was part of the Frankfurt School, part of this avant-garde school of artists, but he was actually faithful to his wife. He was a creep in some ways, but he was a pretty good family man. These are two adopted daughters that are shown with his wife in a family setting, and him in the right bottom there in his older years. He did sculpture, he did painting, etc. But the interesting thing, of interest to me, was a particular piece in the collection that he had done, and the collection contained a half dozen, maybe 12 or 13 of his paintings and works. But this painting stood out as something that must have had a message. And it was kind of crude, but it was impressionistic. It's called Die Hoffnung, which means the hopefulness, if you will. And it was done around 1901. And it was done when his wife was expecting their first child. Now it turns out this was what they call a study. Now an artist, when he does a painting, will frequently do rough sketches, and this was a rough painting of the final product. One of the finished versions of this looked more like this. Much more intriguing. It shows his wife expectant, looking forward to this child. She's almost angelic in her appearance. And what happens is the child, unfortunately, is stillborn. And so after the child is born, he paints his wife in much more dramatic colors. She's not quite as cheerful. She's not quite as pretty. She's not quite as hopeful. And then he puts a picture of the infant above. And of course, the infant was stillborn, which was a tragedy for them. So after thinking about it for a couple of years, he added 2 panels to this. And they kind of complete what's called a triptych, because it's 3 panels. The center panel is his wife and the baby, and then these are the 2 side panels. Are you ready? You sure you're ready? These are the side panels. So when you look at this all together, this is 1903 or 4, as he's had a chance to think about the tragedy of losing this baby. What message is he telling? What do you think?
The Grim Reaper is coming for everybody? Or,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. We can have hope, but it's fleeting. There's a lot of ways you could characterize that, but it's haunting, isn't it? Because his view of the world was that it was surrounded with death and without hope. So we have this hope, but it's an illusion. And so he's telling this idea, and he renamed the 3 panels together from die Hoffnung to die Vergänglichkeit, which means the ephemeral, which is fleeting, the temporary. So we might think of things and be hopeful, but they're fleeting and they're gone. So he, again, is telling a picture of his worldview, and his worldview is without God and it's without hope. So as we contrast these, you can see that not only is there's a difference in the style and the message, there's a difference in the attractiveness. Now, the Rembrandt painting is well executed. It's certainly much more detailed, but it tells a more beautiful story, at least to me. And you can have your own opinion. That's what makes it subjective, right? But the subjective opinion, we have different sides and all that sort of thing, but the Rembrandt picture tells a story of hope, and the other one tells a different story. So artists frequently will tell, as I said earlier, their worldview through their art. So as we progress into the 20th century, we have this kind of painting. And anybody know the artist on this one?
It's Jackson Pollock.
It's Jackson Pollock. Very good. And it is a splatter drag painting, which he kind of originated. And so when you look at this and you contrast it, here's a quiz show. Identify the professional. I've already told you that the Jackson Pollock is on the left. Who do you think is on the right?
Could be anybody.
Could be anybody, right? But it turns out it's actually a painter's apron. It's just a segment of it. And so there was a research study they did, and I'm only going to show 2 of the 4 paintings, but there were 4 paintings. One was done by a professional artist. One was done, a couple were done by animals, and then there was another one that I'll tell you about in a second. So of these 2 paintings, which one would you say is done by the professional? Which one?
The one on the right.
The one on the right, okay. Any other guesses? Anybody want to go with the left one? Okay, you take the left. Good for you. It's hard to tell, isn't it? Well, it turns out this one on the right is actually the winner. It's done by a guy named Hans Hofmann, and it's called laburnum, which I have no idea what that means. He doesn't either. Okay. And so there's a kind of an interesting quote here. But before I get to the quote, let me go to this. So this is the other one, just so you know. This is oh, sorry. So if we let this play, the one on the left was by a 4-year-old named Jack Penzansky. The one on the right is Hans Hofmann. And AI said, well, I think the one on the right, it said, it's probably this guy, Cy Twombly. Okay, didn't even come close. I don't know who Cy Twombly is. And then when I asked it about the second one, the one that's done by a 4-year-old, let's see, I think, anyway, it said that one was easier to identify, but it didn't come up with the right one either. So let me go back. Oh, I've run away with myself. Let me go back to, anyway, so there's a pretty funny quote, which I'll read. So it compared these two paintings to two that were done by monkeys, okay? And it says, so it seems evident that most likely your pet monkey could not have painted that. If you're looking for a cynical take on the art world, however, here's your fodder. Even the art students preferred the child's or the animal's painting over the professional's and judged it to be objectively better 30 to 40% of the time. And that's even when they were labeled correctly. The next time you try to make a buck passing your progeny's paintings off as masterpieces, remember this. You could fool some of the people all the time, and all the people some of the time, and art students about a third of the time. So again, subjective assessment of art. And again, back to Francis Schaeffer, as he was thinking about this modernist trend with the splatter drag and all that, he said, some artists may not know that they are consciously showing forth a worldview. Nonetheless, a worldview usually does show through. Even those works which were constructed under the principle of art for art's sake often imply a worldview. Even the worldview that there is no meaning is a message. In any case, whether the artist is conscious of the worldview or not, to the extent that it is there, it must come under the judgment of the Word of God. And so he's saying, again, this idea that, that all art tells a story. So as we get into the modernist period, where everything is physical, material, there's no spiritual essence at all, we get a whole different kind of art, and the Jackson Pollock is an example of that. But here's another whole area of art called cubism. And again, everything is functional, it's mechanical, it can be deduced, or it's a reductionist approach that we can take to art. Here's geometric abstraction. It doesn't really tell a story other than geometry and mathematics is the nature of the world. Here's combining machines with geometric shapes. And then here's anti-art, an iron with spikes in it. Obviously unfunctional, but a piece of art. Urinal on its side, and so on. And that's called Fountain by Marid Duchamp. Okay, fine. And then we have, what's the story here? Equivalent 8, Roman numeral lowercase 8, which is 8 blocks this way, 8 blocks this way, 8 blocks that way. So it's 8 equivalent. So 2 layers of 8 by 8. It's art. And so on. So Brettel, again, he was a brilliant art historian who was here at UT Dallas. I quoted some of his stuff because, again, I gave him the presentation too. He hated it because he thought I brought too much interdisciplinarity to the presentation, but oh well. But here's what was in his book. This is out of his book. He said, nothing outside the realm of, this is a book on the art in the early 20th century, modernism. Nothing was outside the realm of art, and the role of art of the modern artist was to produce a new visual world in keeping with industrial technology in which beauty was to be found in the world of mass production. In many ways, their thinking went way beyond the art of painting. Yet each used painting as a way of communicating these ideals to a sophisticated intelligentsia. Their most profound moment came in 1925 at this exhibition in Paris. in which they collaborated to create a new domestic spaces in which painting, sculpture, furniture, decorative arts, and architecture were all equal in their conscious emulation of mass-produced objects. This is the age of Henry Ford and mass production and so on. And here's the key takeaway. Their utopian world was so pure that it appealed only to a few wealthy clients rather than to the workers and social organizers for whom it was intended. So even Brettel is seeing that art tells a story, even though he rejected my presentation. But that's okay. I'm not bitter. It's okay. But this comes from his book, which is in the library here at UT Dallas. And it's a good book, Modern Art, 1851 to 1929, Capitalism and Representation. So again, even the secular art historians recognize that art tells a story and that beauty has a contribution to that art, although in this period it became very utilitarian, and that was communicating the worldview. But we are naturally drawn toward the beautiful. Now, why would God create, or why would the creative entity, whoever you want to call him, create something like this? He didn't have to do this. But as we see this time-lapse image of a rose opening, you're just drawn to it. I mean, it's hard to look away. And when you think it's done, it keeps going. Yeah, it's just amazing creativity, and that's all programmed into the plant itself. And we see, as you know, many varieties of incredibly beautiful plants and animals. This is another, I don't know what this plant is called. It's a tropical plant that I took a picture of and didn't ever figure out what it was. I could probably do a Google lens now and figure out what the flower actually was. But think about the animal world as well. Here's a jellyfish just floating in the ocean. Just incredible delicacy. Here's a shark, a hummingbird, and the way that they fly. The beak stays absolutely stationary as they're flying and maneuvering in the wind. Same thing with the eagle. If you look at a bird of prey, they can actually hover in wind currents and their head never moves with respect to the camera. It's interesting. A cheetah with the graceful, especially when we slow it down, the graceful motion. And incredibly effective as they go over 100 kilometers per hour, 60 miles an hour. So all these animals that were created for a function, they're incredibly well suited to the environment in which they live, and yet they were designed to be beautiful as well as functional. Now this is also, again, recognized by secular folks as well as the religious folks. The New York Times had a feature a while back, How Beauty is Making Scientists Rethink Evolution. And in that article, there were a number of things. They focused on birds and feathers. And if you look at these images, these are all images of feathers in various degrees of magnification. The incredible plumage of this bird, just vibrant and dramatic. And as you look closer and closer, and you see the structure of these feathers, so that they work for flight and they interlock and they have an incredible working aerodynamic function amidst all this beauty that seems superfluous. It wouldn't be for a function. But we see that same kind of beauty in the world around us. This is a video I took on a cruise in Alaska. Just incredible clarity of the sky and the reflection on the water. And we look at this and we think, that's beautiful. Why do we think it's beautiful? Why don't we just say, oh, rocks, trees, water? But we look at this and we go, wow, at least I did. Or this was in Grand Cayman, a picture of the most incredible sunset I've ever seen. It was the way it came through the clouds, and was just a shaft of light through the clouds and reflecting on the water. And so humans try to emulate this kind of grandeur when we build structures like this. And we see the symmetry and the high vaulted ceiling drawing our attention upward toward the heavens, the realm where God dwells. Or this is sort of an open air cathedral. I went to a wedding in Arkansas, and they have a couple of these. There's an architect who's done a couple of these cathedrals that are almost all glass. And so you can see all the trees and the beauty outside. It just draws the nature into the building, just dramatic. But then there are other kinds of beauty as well. There is the beauty of Abraham Lincoln with the Emancipation Proclamation and the way that he freed the slaves almost through a singular purpose of will. in spite of being told it would be politically dangerous and so on. But it was a beautiful act and a risky act, and it probably cost him his life. And then there's the story of the Good Samaritan. There's nothing beautiful about this injured man on the road, but the action, the altruistic action of the person who went to his aid, that's beautiful. Or we see Jesus raising a dead young man. And a dead man is not exactly, a dead young man is not a pretty sight. Or this image of Christ sacrificing himself for us. And so as we think about these ideas of beauty, and let me just turn the question back over to you. What is beauty? To me, I'll tell you what I think, obviously, that it's that to which we find ourselves drawn or attracted. It's a sincere, selfless action of the heart on behalf of another. What makes something beautiful for you? It's worth thinking about. Here's what Beethoven would have said. So our contemplation of music, of the arts, can draw us to appreciate the one who gave us a world in which those things exist. So couple of, whoops, let me go back. I just lost my last slide. We don't want to do that. We'll try this again. So a couple of resources that are worth thinking about. You won't let me go back. They're right here.
Just click directly
Yeah.
on slide 100 maybe or something.
Yeah. Okay. So this one is called A Meaningful World by Benjamin Weichert and Jonathan Witt. Talks about how a world in which we see this beauty has meaning, and it's really well done. Francis Schaeffer's book, Art and the Bible, and then Nancy Piercy's book, Saving Leonardo. All these have really good perspectives on art, and they're easy reads. Nancy Piercy's a little harder, but well worth it. So with that, what questions do you have or discussion ideas?
How would you say beauty points to God? You mentioned earlier that maybe it's not direct evidence, but beauty can point to God. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the idea that we can appreciate it, that we have consciousness to start with, and that we, within that consciousness, can even perceive of something other than survival, shows that we are not simply survival machines, that there's something more to the way we're built to contemplate the beauty of colors and animals and scenery. And I think that points to someone outside of the physical world who put those things in the world, but then created in us an appreciation of them. And I think, so in that way, I think it points to an entity that I would call God. Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
So what would you say about things that we find like repulsive or ugly? Like, surely those want to point away from God, right? So, like,
I think those things for me would point to our mortality and the fact that this is not our home and that there is a better place, that we have a recognition of something being more attractive, more something I want to be drawn toward as opposed to something I'm repulsed by, shows that there is a difference, that there is a quality that we want to be drawn toward and away from the ugliness. You know, you think of all the war, terrorism, stuff going on in Ukraine. That's not the way it's designed to be. I had a pastor who gave a sermon at a funeral of a 2-year-old who had crib death. Just in the middle of the night, they never did figure out why the young boy died, and he said, it's appropriate to be angry that this is the situation in which we find ourselves, that this is not the way God designed it, this is not the way He designed us to be, and it points us to the fact that there is a better place, that there's a better outcome. And so I think those things kind of remind us that it's like the contrast makes you appreciate the beauty even more. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah.
So we talked about consciousness a couple of times through the presentation. Do you think that the argument from beauty then is in any way like dependent on argument for consciousness being more than just a material phenomenon?
Yeah, I think it's a much broader discussion, and it's one that Michael Egner has done a lot of work on with the Immortal Mind book that came out last year. Really helps to think about how the mind is separate from the body, and that's a whole separate talk, but how there are out-of-body experiences, there are near-death experiences, there is the experience of the semi-conscious or person in a coma who comes out and then is able to tell people that were around them what was said at different times. So the idea that the physical body is not the only thing that is allowing us to perceive the world, that there's something else, that there's this mind consciousness. I call it the you-ness. It's the spirit, mind, body, intellect, self-awareness, ability to contemplate. All those things are the spiritual side, whereas the physical side is, it has a connection to that which we don't fully understand. Your memory can be affected by physical changes in your brain, and that's a little confusing, but at the same time, your awareness of yourself is always the same, even if your ability to recall, for example, in old age, as I get older, I forget words. As we get older, our brains don't work as well, and that does affect the way that we interact with the world, but we still have the same thoughts even though the words can't come. Or if you're thinking of a word, but you know the concept. So yeah, I think there is a difference between the physical side and the spiritual side. And our ability to perceive and be conscious and to contemplate those kinds of things speaks that there's something more than just the material world. And I think that points to a creator who is also, if we're made in his image, then he also is one who can contemplate and think and create and be intelligent in his practical outworking of what he created.
Maybe one other possible response to the question.
Yeah, give me your response. Yeah.
Is it possible that the experience of beauty itself contributes to the evidence that consciousness is more than just material? Like if beauty were just an evolutionary phenomenon, like does that match what we think about how evolution would work?
That's a good description. I think that's helpful. So I think you're right. Yeah, I would agree with you. Yeah.
Along that line,
You're next. Go ahead.
what do you think of, maybe you've seen them where it'll appear like some bear is like sitting down, not really doing anything, but just looking over a mountain range, and in our perspective, it almost looks like that bear is appreciating the beauty of, let's say, a mountain range or something, right? Where maybe beauty is universal to everything in a sense.
Yeah, I guess I would push back a little bit. I have never seen a bear looking at what looks like a sunset or something like that. And typically, if we're looking at a beautiful sunset, I don't see the deer coming out of the woods going, wow. I don't know that animals have that ability to appreciate beauty in that way. Maybe bears do. I've never seen that. If you come up with a picture, I'd love to see it. He may be just looking for movement for his next meal. But
it's hard to know what they're thinking, right?
yeah, exactly.
Really
Yeah, they
I don't want to spend too much time around it to figure out either.
yeah,
I'm sure
exactly.
people can find plenty of pictures where they happen to be looking, but are they really?
Right.
It's hard to know.
Are they contemplating or not? It's a good question. I wish I knew, but yeah.
Where would you draw the line between objective and subjective beauty?
Again, I think it's in the assessment. And so some people might find the Kuno Amiet triptych more beautiful if they think it captures reality better. So again, that would be a subjective assessment of those two pieces of art, and people are welcome to disagree. What's objective about that is that it exists, it's in 3 dimensions, it has hinges, it has oil-based paint. Those are all the objective ways to describe his painting, and the same thing for the Rembrandt, of course. The content is where we can disagree, and I suspect somebody like Richard Dawkins or an atheist might say, well, that's more accurate in terms of reality, and therefore I think that's more beautiful. And that, again, they'd be welcome to come to that assessment, but that would be a subjective versus an objective assessment. What else? Yeah.
I was just gonna add on to like the animal thing that was mentioned. guess some of the things, I think it's interesting, some of the things that we find that are beautiful can get more abstract and further away from like actual survival. Cause, like, something like finding like, a potential mate or something like that attractive.
I'm sorry,
like,
finding a what?
A potential mate.
Okay.
Or something like
Mhm.
that attractive, I think.
I think he just proposed, but I'm not sure.
That makes sense how that would arise from an evolutionary
Sure.
standpoint.
Sure.
But, something you don't see animals doing is, and you'll see animals doing mating dances, stuff like that. But something you don't see animals doing is standing out in the field at the middle of the night looking up at the stars.
Well, you're gonna have to talk to the bear man back here. So.
But I
No, but I
feel
think
like I'm hard pressed to find an
yeah.
example of that. I'm willing to be proven wrong on that.
Even
but-
if they are, it's like, well, what is the evolutionary advantage to that behavior?
Right.
Yeah, but that is
Staring up at the
strange.
sky at
And-
night seems like it might be disadvantageous.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And something even more abstract, the fact we can find beauty in math, I certainly do.
Sure.
That's an
Yeah.
incredibly abstract thing. I don't understand why we would. And I'm not saying like our ability to do math, of course we have the ability to do math. AIs can do math. But why do we find it beautiful? Why do we actually want to do it?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So mathematics, for example, is beautiful because of its effectiveness, its symmetry, the way that it works to describe the world. Mathematics is the language of science in many ways. And so I would agree that mathematics can be beautiful in the way that it helps us do things and functions and who made it up? What is it? Did God make up the whole mathematics idea? Or is that man-made in the way we describe things? I think
So
God
it's
gave us the
discovered.
creativity to understand that. What's that?
Seems more like it's discovered by us than.
It does seem like, yeah, that's a good way to say
We
it.
can make up some aspects, I guess. but-
Yeah, and AI, as smart as it is, I don't think it's been shown to be able to generate proofs that don't already exist. Has it been able to solve things?
Actually, I just saw today that there's a series of proofs put out by some mathematician, about 1,500 of them, and that an AI actually provided new proofs that have never been discovered before for 3 of the hard problems that
Oh,
this
cool.
mathematician put out.
So it's combining knowledge to generate a new synthesis. So that's good.
Yeah,
But again, I think the beauty of math, I think that is something that, again, it would be subjective, whether you find it beautiful or not. Some people hate math, that's a different issue. But anyway, yeah.
So, okay, going back to animals, I find it really interesting how we find beauty in what is actually dangerous. Like how,
Mm.
some, like, animals will have really bright colors to ward off other things that are trying to eat them, but we find that really beautiful to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it can be different, much like God. He tells stories on different levels. In Revelation 12, there's a story, there's a description of a woman clothed with the sun with a moon at her feet and a dragon, and that has multiple meanings. There's a national meaning for some of the wars that were going on, but there's also a futuristic meaning. I think beauty and the way animals are designed are similar, and sometimes those beautiful colors we see are not visible to predators. And so it may actually be camouflage to predators, whereas it's beautiful to us. And so you have that kind of a dilemma going on as well. You may remember the picture of the shark swimming. I actually took that picture while I was scuba diving with sharks. We didn't plan on scuba diving with sharks, and they were small. They were only 4 to 5 feet. They can certainly take your fingers. But anyway, but it was not scary at all. And if you want a picture of dangerous sharks that are beautiful, there's a documentary, I think it's on Netflix, and it's called The Shark Whisperer, and it's about a woman in Hawaii who free dives with sharks and has learned to do, through her behaviors, to communicate, don't eat me, I'm your friend. I'm a friend, not food, I don't know, anyway. But we're drawn to that because it's beautiful scenery, the sharks are beautiful animals, but they're dangerous. As C.S. Lewis captured.
Quite safe, really. I've done a lot of shark diving
Yeah,
myself.
yeah.
There are a
They
few
get
species that-
they get a bad rap, and generally they don't mess with humans, although
Yeah.
there are exceptions, and they can be dangerous. And she acknowledges that in the document. But again, Shark Whisperer, if you want to be kept up late thinking about sharks, it's a fascinating documentary. But it tells that same story. It's a beautiful depiction of these sharks that could just, take her arm off in an instant if they really wanted to. So it's a great observation. How do we put those things together? But it's attractive. Why do we watch horror movies? That's a whole different topic. I don't watch horror movies. I don't pay to be scared, you know. But anyway.
Well, we are sort of out of time. We're trying to do a little better this year. It's ending promptly, I believe, right? So it's,
Yes.
but this was great. Thanks
Well,
so
thank
much,
you.
Rick.
Appreciate it. Thanks. And Robert or anybody else, I'll stick around if you have questions. Too. So thanks.
And after this, we're going to Canes tonight. So if anyone wants to come out, it'll be the Canes on Coit and Campbell, the one we normally go to.